thank you for everyone who's signed up for this webinar. Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. My name is Julio Romo, and I'm the founder of Twofourseven Strategy. Historically, I've been working with governments, private sector businesses, and investors in the UK and overseas, focusing on strategy, strategic communications, and national and international stakeholder engagement. I've partnered with Folgate Advisors, who's a new firm, in fact, even more of a new community of senior communications professionals from around the world, founded by David Gallagher and others. And we've started the program off with Folgate of focusing on AI and the impact the AI is having on communications and reputation management. PR and communication has certainly changed over the last, say, 30 years, both in-house, agency size, how we work for clients, how we deliver our communications, and so on. I remember years ago, social media had a big change in how we communicate. Certainly journalism kind of adapted quickly to that. It allowed journalists and newsrooms to reach out to people directly, but it equally disrupted that. What we've seen, sadly, since is obviously how the media landscape has changed dramatically and how people get news today. Most comms teams, in-house, agency side, have certainly made the changes historically to technology, and obviously as we have AI, no doubt it's going to change again. But that said, it's only an issue if we stay still and if the comms industry doesn't adapt. And I think this is something that certainly with regards to myself and Twofourseven or Folgate is what we're here to do and to support. Today's session is going to focus very much on looking at the big picture of AI. And I'll introduce you to HP from IBM in a minute, but equally how newsrooms have adapted in journalism and in reaching their specific audiences. I'm delighted to be joined by two fantastic speakers. I know them very well, and I know the insight they're going to share is going to be great, and hopefully we'll get a lot of discussion as well. Laura Oliver is a journalist, editor, and senior newsroom consultant, and a reporter also for the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism. She has extensive experience in advising and leading media organizations around the world in adapting actually technology and embedding that into their kind of various news gathering forms. Hans-Petter Dalen, or HP, as he's better known as, is IBM's business executive for AI, responsible for EMEA. And very much a futurist. I remember when we met, and some of the thinking that he shared really did make me go kind of wow with regards to kind of where AI is today. We're going to be recording this session and then sharing it both as a video and equally kind of we'll write up about it. So please keep your microphones off. It's going to work as follows. We're going to spend about 25 to 30 minutes having a debate about it around these specific subjects. And then 30 minutes on, we'll open it to questions from people. So feel free to get your questions ready. There'll be one or two polls that I'll put out during that time. Feel free to kind of share your your own views and answer those. But I'm going to start actually with HP. With regards to kind of AI, obviously, and the clients that IBM kind of works with, it's been a good number of years now that AI has been on the scene and certainly has gone mainstream. What kind of disruption have you seen really at a business or at a governmental level? And obviously this is within the EMEA, that kind of your area, your ground is at.
Yeah. Thanks, Julio, for that introduction. I usually start with saying that if you're under the age of 35, you might not have heard of IBM. We've been around for a few years. We've been around for 114 years. Actually, it's short for International Business Machines, but I recently heard that maybe we should rename it to Intelligent Business Machines. We've been doing machine learning technologies probably since the late 50s. So as a concept, artificial intelligence is not new. It was coined by 3 students back in the 50s. How we've been part of when the term was coined would probably said that no, it shouldn't be artificial intelligence, because it's not really. The purpose of this technology is to augment human intelligence, not replace it. So we prefer to use the terminology augmented intelligence, because that's how you apply this technology intelligently, we think. It's been decades with heavy investments and decades without any investment almost at all, commonly known as AI winters. The 80s was a winter for AI. And then in the 90s, IBM's Deep Blue computer beat Garry Kasparov and chess. And that sort of reignited a new wave of investments. But it wasn't really until 2011 when IBM's Watson technology beat two reigning champions in the TV show Jeopardy that companies really started to reinvest heavily into AI as a means of, well, when you combine machine learning predictive technology with natural language generation, which Watson actually proved that you could do, there's some really, really, really strong enterprise use cases here, right? And that's when, you know, concepts like chatbots and things like that was started to be introduced. And you can, if you look at what chatbots was maybe just 5 years ago until now via generative AI, and now that we talk about agentic AI, we're just moving, this technology is moving so quickly, and it's so full of promise. But in my view, and I'm happy to be able to discuss this in some more detail, we don't focus enough on the use case. We focus too much on the technology.
And I mean, with regards to that, I mean, do you think at the moment everything is about the tech and not about the human adoption? And one of the things that I keep hearing a lot is about AI and technology delivering efficiency rather than productivity. And that is something that equally in the media world, in the newsroom area, it is an issue about having less humans, more tech. What's your vision on that?
I think so. And you'll probably noticed already that 2025, nobody really talks about generative AI anymore. That was yesterday's news. We talk about agentic AI now, how agents are becoming autonomous and will start to do a lot of stuff for us. About 3 weeks ago, and I'm not going to call out anyone, but about 3 weeks ago, I attended AI Week in Oslo. And one of the evenings was dedicated to agentic AI, and all the big players were there. And the first company spoke about technologies. Second company spoke about their technologies. The third company spoke about their technologies. The fourth company spoke about how the first company was their biggest client. And then I came on and said, I'm not going to talk about technologies at all. I'm just going to talk about how we use it. Because if we don't understand how we use it, if we don't focus on the use cases, it will become a technology-driven evolution, and that's not going to benefit lines of business. HR's biggest problem, for instance, in my view, is if this becomes a discussion about technology and choice of the technology, nobody will really bother to teach HR how they can apply AI successfully in enhancing an overall employee experience. And just take IBM as a prime example. We've automated 96% of our HR function in IBM using generative and agentic AI technologies, because our HR understands what AI can do for them. We're a technology company after all. But if you're in banking, finance, or some other industry, we have to take very seriously that AI literacy is coupled with a fear of AI taking your jobs. And so there will be a resistance. And then if this only becomes a question of whether you choose one technology over the other, you don't actually resolve any business issues. And it's funny, you spoke about what impact have we seen? And Laura, I'm going to let you talk soon, but you just put a coin on me. Yeah, what have we seen yet of actual enterprise adoption of generative AI? Very little, but you'll see surveys saying that 90% of companies will say that they use generative AI on a daily basis. Yes, personal productivity, but personal productivity doesn't benefit your company, it benefits you unless you contribute that hour you save back to the company. If you use it for drinking more coffee or leave early, it doesn't benefit your company, right? So that we see this as, okay, that's fine. Personal productivity is massively important for me as a person, as an employee, but it doesn't touch my core business. And if you look at how many companies have actually used generative AI or AI in any form to start impacting their core business processes? Very, very few. And that's what we have to move towards, including in communications.
And Laura, I mean, coming to the disruptions that the media and news community have experienced, and it's been going on for about 15 plus years. Social media had a big impact on that. The way that obviously social media has made businesses, government communicate directly to the audience, but obviously still through the media. AI has suddenly come in an environment where the Edelman Trust Barometer states that the trust in media as well as organizations and governments has been challenged. And now you have another curveball with regards to AI, yet media organizations are adopting this. How are you finding in your own experiences with newsrooms that AI is impacting? And is it impacting on staff, or is it impacting again on productivity of journalists?
I mean, firstly, I think it's an interesting comparison to make with how social media disrupted the newsrooms that I have worked in. So I should say my views are skewed by working predominantly in European and US markets. Mm-hmm. And I think you're right, there's this kind of uneasy tension and perhaps some lessons not learned from how we handled. I say this as someone who used to be a head of social media in a newsroom and learned some of these things the hard way. So there's some kind of, in some places there's reticence, as Hans said, there's too much focus on the tech, and there's this kind of hangover from the relationships we had with social media companies and then how that has panned out, I think. You've also got some really interesting moves with certain kind of quote unquote bigger players who are taking kind of early, not even early moves, but making partnerships directly with AI companies and technology providers in ways that perhaps smaller or medium-sized newsrooms and businesses might not be able to. So we're seeing this kind of slight separation as well. In terms of sort of on the more day-to-day side, which I think is what you were asking about in terms of like impact on productivity, I agree with HP in that when I speak to journalists, there's a lot who are using AI day-to-day for productivity, for efficiency. I think for far too long at a business level as well, within journalism, certainly, the focus has been on where are those marginal kind of efficiency savings we can make, where are those marginal cost savings we can make. And that is partly a result of, 10 to 20 years of decline, and people trying to, find ways to make things look a bit better, make things look improvement. But I think where it's disrupting in a positive way and where it's being used most effectively is the newsrooms who have identified problems it can help them solve, and whether that's problem in a more kind of long-term way. So thinking, there's a great journalist and expert called David Caswell who writes very well on this, about thinking away from this kind of short-term productivity gain, should we call it, to a more medium to long-term model about how we can redevelop our products to better serve our audiences, and how we can, and I'm saying we as newsrooms and journalists, how we can find a place for ourselves in this AI mediated world that our audiences are already, living in. So I would really recommend reading some of his work, thinking about this as well, because he's spent a lot more time thinking about it than I have.
Do you think then, obviously, kind of in communications and every business, let it be in businesses, in governments, reputation is that prime commodity, and trust is that prime commodity. I remember reading, and I think I mentioned this to you earlier, that obviously the technology does so much, but we're all in the trust business. That includes kind of media and journalists as well, and certainly communicators and PRs. Do you find that with regards to the rise of AI, the increase in the adoption of AI, the tech anyway, that we are going to creating a constant churn of content that can create the risk of increased misinformation, faults and issues that can create audiences that are not going to be kind of critically thinking about issues that might need reporting?
That's a really interesting question. And when HP said earlier, we're on to agentic AI and we've moved away from Gen AI, and I thought, yes, not in all the conversations I'm having, because I think, with any new tech or process being deployed in a centuries-old industry, there's usually an element that is easier for people to grasp, and Gen AI in many ways has been, or a version of it has been, the thing that's been easiest for journalists and newsrooms to grasp. Also, we are in the content making business, so as much as for 10 to 20 years, myself and other digital journalists working have said, it's not about quantity. We still love shipping absolutely vast volumes of content. So we sort of, I don't know, it's playing into our worst tendencies, I suppose. But yeah, just on your point around trust and misinformation. So I think there's a kind of temptation then for us to produce more. There is this fear, as HP said, about threats to skills, competencies, jobs. And there's some interesting examples of regional newsrooms in the UK, for example, using kind of AI assisted reporting, and some of the oldest forms of AI being integrated newsrooms is around producing content through structured data, which actually I think is a great idea. But the idea has always been that should free up time for more enterprise journalism, for more work that serves our audiences where they are, that helps us reach new audiences, that helps us rethink our business model. I think you'd probably need a white paper or more kind of structured analysis to work out whether that time is happening. It's the same analogy that I think HP gave us about an individual putting that hour back into their business. Are we putting back those hours that we've quote unquote saved by having an AI assistant help us rewrite a press release into an article? Are we putting that back into an investigation or to something that we would consider of long-term value? I don't know, and my gut feeling is that perhaps we're not in some cases. But yeah, the misinformation challenge is another part of this. I realize we're doing very rapidly dotting around all these issues, but it's a huge concern in our industry at the moment, because we were already struggling, I think, in many ways with the scale of the problem in terms of volumes of content. And now we've got this extra layer of ease with which information can be manipulated or changed or generated, falsified. And it's kind of exposing perhaps long-running literacy challenges on both the industry side and the audience side, I would say. One thing I always keep thinking about is, and it was a Reuters Institute report from a while ago, which talked about whether audiences, I'm paraphrasing badly here, whether audiences kind of care, that something has been tweaked or enhanced by AI. And the answer in that survey was, nah, I don't really. And as a journalist, that made my sort of heart leap into my mouth. But it has made me rethink about how we might communicate, our own uses of AI in our newsroom, and what an audience might consider to be the kind of transparency threshold. Anyway, that sticks in my mind all the time when I'm thinking about this conversation about AI's impact on misinformation.
I mean, AI is impacting everything, and I think at that point, very much about time saved as well, both in the newsroom or even in comms teams, in decision makers and kind of amongst the C-suite and board is critical. Just one point that I thought I'd want to kind of ask your views on, HP. When we talk about AI, we generally talk about the brands of AI, ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini. Most corporates obviously will have an account, a cloud account, say Microsoft account, Google and the like. And that therefore pushes us to talk about AI more in the large language model. But we also have the small language models. That, in fact, one of the points that kind of brought us together, debating that and the data. And I'm wondering if we need to put some clarity in place about what AI really is. It's not just LLMs, large language models, but it's also small language models. And in that data, there's a lot of insight that is vital and equally that journalists are looking at. Should we kind of more start talking about AI stacks that people are building rather than just the specific tools like ChatGPT or Gemini or the like?
Yeah, and I think we're getting there, to be honest with you. I think we realize that there isn't one big model to rule them all. And if you look at the foundation models and the large language models, they're the foundation of what we call generative AI. Predictive machine learning AI don't necessarily require a foundation model, right? They're trained on much smaller data sets and are basically algorithms that are trained to do one specific task. For instance, predict your credit worthiness, which you don't want to leave to a large language model in the cloud, perhaps, because that's very sensitive information. But let me just tie this to a very practical example, actually two practical examples, both from Norway. I'm originally Norwegian, so I pay attention to what happens in Norway. And the first one is actually a journalism use case, which I thought was brilliant. And we're in the northern parts of Norway, and there's like a group of smaller newspapers. And they don't have a lot of journalists, but one of the things that they really want to be thorough about is things like building applications. So they spent a lot of expensive, valuable journalism time just reading through new building applications to find which case to investigate further. This is like, a waste of good journalistic time, right? Why don't we use generative AI not to generate content, because generative AI can do more things than just generate content. Generative AI can summarize content. So we built a very small model for them that is really, really, really good and trained at summarizing content. And that's it. So it's a much smaller model in Norwegian that's trained at really, really becoming good at summarizing content. So we let that model run through the new building applications and make a summary of all of them, right? So you save a lot of time for journalists, and flag those that it thinks that you should go after as a journalist. And that is a brilliant use case where you use this technology to augment human intelligence instead of artificially replace it with something that isn't. Another point to your point about large language models, we've actually done some analysis on this. You know how data sets are broken into smaller tokens, and the output from a model is based on the number of tokens. Most of the tokenizers in this world are English. So when you tokenize Norwegian data, it's tokenized as if it was English. And Norway has maybe 33% less words than English, but we've got a couple of special characters. We write stuff differently. So the tokenizer really doesn't work. So even though we have fewer words, it's much, much, much more expensive to have output from these models in another language that isn't English. So there's a huge opportunity here for national tokenizers as well. So we can use much more sort of enterprise-ready data too. And one last point about enterprise data: the large language models are likely trained on all available public data on the planet. Less than 1% is enterprise data. So if you as an enterprise, and Laura, we're not talking about generative AI, right? The generative business processes in a trusted way, because to your point, Julio, it's all about trust. And I know I have a second example to come up with too. But we see small models enriched with enterprise data and governed, where we understand the risk and how we can mitigate the risk through a governance framework that allows us to unleash generative AI agents on our clients. And McKinsey very quickly identified customer AI where the potential is for additional value add, right? And just imagine a customer-heavy organization like a telco being able to use generative AI in interacting with their clients and being able to trust that you have a very, very cleverly trained model, not expensive because it's tokenized in the right language, and enriched with your client data. Now to my failure example, also in Norway, the city of Tromsø. Politicians decided that it's not enough kids, unfortunately, so we have to close some schools and some childcare centers and kindergartens, etc. Let's write a report justifying why we made this political decision, and they did, using ChatGPT. And the public didn't react well to that. That's not a particularly well argumented political report, is it? Why do we do this politically? And it had invented a lot of false references, right? Source material that didn't exist, etc. Problem is, nobody thought to actually verify the output from ChatGPT. Nobody checked the references, nobody checked the content, and they just published it. It's being branded as the biggest AI scandal in Norway. I would counter-argument that. I said, that's not an AI scandal, that's a human scandal.
That is a human scandal, yeah.
Yeah, because it's because we haven't got a risk, we haven't got an understanding of the risk, and we haven't got a governance framework around it to mitigate it.
I mean, I'll share an example. I worked for 3 years within UK government at what was then the Department for International Trade as their head of communications and engagement for the digital data and technology team. Now, thankfully, we had a very strong governance structure in place. Now, we have to, and obviously within UK government, they put a lot of focus now on AI. I can relate on the flip side of that not having happened to exactly how little due diligence or critical thinking can happen, because how AI is perceived without thinking. Once you get the data, you still have to fact check it and verify it. Very much like I know what happens in newsrooms as well. You need the final set of eyes rather than just going out and proving. So I can very much relate to that. I'm going to just quickly, and unfortunately, we are kind of running out of time. I know there'll be a lot of questions. I'm just going to publish this quick poll and just to ask people what they think and how they describe their current use of AI in communications and in content as well. So if you do see it, feel free to vote on that. Going back to kind of the newsrooms, and obviously comms, reputation professionals rely on that relationship with media and with journalism. What do you think could be better in how those people on our side of the fence could be better managing our own data or even our own communication, so that we can better use AI to have that better relationship with journalism? And how has journalism changed, and how is it adopting AI specifically in schools, like in journalism schools?
I mean, I'm definitely not about to tell your industry how they can.
No, please.
But certainly within the journalism schools and training programs that I work on, it's increasingly a topic of practice and training. I recently helped develop some curricula for journalism schools actually in Eastern Europe, working with their staff. And one of the biggest challenges we faced was this is a fast-moving field. And let's say you've got a 9-month to year-long journalism course. So much will have changed during that time. So much, there will be so many more precedents set in terms of the ethical side or the guidelines that we need to put in place. So the way I have approached it is, and there are many other ways to approach it, but the way I have approached it is, this shouldn't be about, as HP says, teaching the tech or training the tech. It should be about the critical thinking skills that we need to assess any new technology that's coming into our industry and how it will affect, workflows, people, risks, reputational, risks including trust. From a journalism side, that also includes things like burnout. Let's think about it that way, and also the use cases. So where is it most applicable? Where is it causing interesting innovation or great waves. And I'm guessing that the same could be said for comms and PR industry, to think about it that way rather than let's focus so much on, like, we need an understanding of the processes involved and what this technology is, don't get me wrong, but I want the students that I'm working with and the faculty I'm working with to kind of have that mindset of, let's say in 10 years time it's something else that they're dealing with, and they know the right questions to ask, and they know the frameworks that they might need to put in place or the governance required. But yeah, it's I said to Julio on the phone earlier, I am sort of slightly concerned because obviously there's another question around training, which is, let's say you create a course for journalism students focused on AI, and then it comes to how you mark their assessments. You've kind of opened this window to all these tools they could potentially use, and actually that's the side that needs most work at the moment, is how you, again, it's a generation who are going to be using AI and have their world mediated by AI. So we need to get better at assessing that and working out when we can have AI used as part of, an essay writing task or a practical task, and what does that mean? But I think that's not there yet. And yeah, I would also encourage educators, or indeed professionals who've got younger staff working with them. My students were constantly using tools that I hadn't come across in ways that I wouldn't have thought of using, and that was fascinating to me. And I would get them to sit down and just show me how they were doing it, because I did not want to stymie that experimentation. And then I could be there to say, okay, but what does that mean if it gives you this output, and how would you deal with that if it was this kind of source? You can then have that conversation. But I didn't ever want to sort of stymie their own innovation, I suppose, or their own experimentation.
One quick, that's a really good point, and I think education is what we are kind of here to do. And in fact, on that point, one final question before kind of we open up to questions from everyone here, or to those who want to ask. HB, and I will declare, McKinsey is a client of mine. They have a good strap line on their tech side, which is never just tech. It's about the culture and about the human. And that's how I kind of support them. Do you think that we need to be spending more time, not just on the tech and the AI stack and talking about that, but on the training, on the prompt training, and developing critical thinking in order to be able to really get the better productivity, as you said early on, from anyone, whether it's an comms agency, a business, a government, an investor? It's spend and invest in the human so that the tech can better support.
100%. And we talk to frustrated C-levels almost weekly that have invested millions in AI technologies and maybe seen 50K in return, because we make this about technology and not where we apply the technology. I have one of my most favorite recent examples is actually Joe and the Juice. And to your point, Laura, how do we embrace this technology instead of running away scared? The global head of recruitment for Joe and the Juice is Danish, and they get an incredible amount of applications every year. I think it was something like 30,000, every year, and it's just incredible, that number. And he said, and now every single one of them has been written by ChatGPT. They're identical. They're mirrors of each other. And I said, I could choose to try and fight that, but how can I ever defeat that? That's never going to happen. So what they did is they developed their own bot that took the first interview with every single one of them and said, first advantage of that is that every single one gets a first interview. And they've built the bot to actually query more about the person's values and align them with Joe and the Juice's company values. And the end result is that they have a more diverse workforce than ever. And it's really, really working brilliantly. And it's just, forget about CVs and cover letters, because it's produced by an agent now. You have to rethink how you attract the best candidates, how you interview them, and the same in the educational systems. Yes, we'll see a lot of student output being generated by AI. Fine, you can't win, you know. We can try and watermark it, and you forget about it. There must be other ways where you can embrace it and coexist with this technology. And if we make this a focus on the technology, whether you use Microsoft, AWS, SageMaker, IBM, or Dataiku, that's not the discussion here. The discussion here is, where do we apply the technology? How do we become smarter in where we apply it? And how do we do it inside a governed framework where we control the risk and we actually, the output is trusted and we can coexist?
That's kind of a really good point to finish on. Now, just open it up. If someone has any questions, just raise your hand and I'll go to you. And feel free to ask. As I mentioned right at the beginning, the webinar is being recorded. The call's being recorded, so we'll share that afterwards. And I encourage you to kind of share it or to comment so we can continue this conversation out of here. Questions from anyone? I think Katie's Clark. Have you got a question? Feel free to take your camera or put your camera on and your mic on if you want to ask a question.
Hi there. Thank you. Really, really fascinating and interesting. I think you mentioned at the beginning something, I think you mentioned Edelman's Trust Barometer, and I think as part of that, they talked about that there's a rise in people believing that government leaders, business leaders, and journalists are purposely misleading people these days, as we have that trust deficit. How do you think we could use AI, or those groups could use AI to help build trust? Are there ways that that you're seeing, or that we should be, as communicators, thinking about ways to sort of rebuild trust using those, using that?
Good question, Katie. Now, I'm going to pass to Laura, to you first. See, what views have you got? Have you got any examples, or have newsrooms that you've been in seen similar examples that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Katie makes a great point. I'm going to pop this link in the chat. This is not an example of countering it, but this is an example of one of the sort of brand issues that I think newsrooms are also facing around, which is a study the BBC did around how its journalism is returned to people when they are, asking questions, appearing in different AI assistants, and how things were interpreted, or how facts were hallucinated, and that is a big issue. So there is some attention sort of drawn to trying to solve that problem. I think I am consistent, I hope, across any event I ever do, that I give a very boring answer, which is, it is about returning to audiences and what they need. And that could be using AI or not using AI. The ways I've seen newsrooms successfully using AI tools and enhanced processes to do this are things like newsrooms, I know in Finland and in other neighboring countries to Ukraine, when they found they suddenly had a diaspora population crossing their borders after the full-scale invasion, using AI tools to help translate their content to reach that audience, because they needed to know about their new country, but also just producing guides and ways to help you navigate your way in a new place, which was not AI enhanced. It's just written by journalists. So I think some of the other uses that are really interesting to me in this sense that do involve AI as well are, how can we use AI to enhance our understanding of audience behavior with our journalism products, because that for a long time has been an issue in newsrooms. Is you might be lucky enough to have an audience research team, you might not. You might be lucky enough to have a data science team, you might not. But actually AI can help fulfill some of those roles, or take some of the heavy lifting out of that analysis, that might give us clues to, things like what makes someone more likely to subscribe, what makes someone more likely to recommend to a friend, what makes someone more likely who arrives from one place stick around, all these things that we've been trying to answer for decades now. Perhaps actually AI can help us do some of the heavy lifting on that analysis side. And there's plenty of examples of then newsrooms responding to that with either new products, online, offline, as a result of what they've discovered from better understanding of their audience data. But yeah, I will always boringly say the best way to try and well, I said to Julio earlier, and this is totally me saying this and no one else, is that I think sometimes in journalism there's a sense that we had trust, we lost it, and it's ours to gain back. I think we need to earn it back. I don't think it's a given anymore. And I think we have a tendency to think that it's something that was ever in our control. And actually things have changed.
HP, have you got anything to add there?
Yeah, I think the couple of levels. First of all, the regulators are very, very, very aware of this, right? And again, just going back to my point, this is about the use and not the technology. If you look at most regulation across the globe, it does actually regulate the use of AI rather than the technology, because the technology must be allowed to evolve. But you could argue that that generative AI and general purpose AI is regulated as a technology by the EU by introducing some transparency requirements for the models that are used and the data sets they use to train algorithms inside them and things like that. So there's an argument to be made, but from an IBM perspective anyway, it's how do we make AI transparent? And how do we, as a provider of AI systems, make sure that the output from those systems are transparent? We believe in things like source attribution. So whenever you generate a piece of content, we can point back to the sources that content was generated from. And we believe that there are things you can do from a governance perspective that makes the use of AI much more secure. It's an interesting point, though, because if we remember the US election in 2016, it was also heavily influenced by Russia, right? And that was before we had generative AI. So that's actually not an AI specific question the way I look at it. That's more like, how do we, the speed of which false information is distributed these days is amplified by social media, things like social media, and social media was never regulated, right?
Yeah.
But the EU certainly have gone in and regulated AI. I think Lord Holmes in the UK have suggested a bill recently. There are more than 100 AI related regulations across 50 American states. So AI is heavily regulated, social media isn't. So it's also about the vehicle, not just the provider or the creator of content. And I think AI can certainly help a lot when it comes to tracking back to source attribution. Where did a piece of information originate? Things like that. You know, we used to call that blockchain maybe, but blockchain isn't one standard. But this could, reintroduce blockchain as a brilliant way of at least making sure that our news sources are accurate and traceable.
Thank you.
Let's leave it there. Has anyone got any other questions? Final one before we wrap up for today. I'm not seeing anything kind of yet, sadly. Look, it's been fantastic. I think we'll call it a day for that. I mean, Laura, HP, thanks very much for joining. Thanks very much for sharing. It's a subject that we could have talked more for hours and gone across a good number of different areas. For me, I think one of the roundup is, as much as we're talking about the tech, we need to talk about the investment in the humans to make sure that we can better use AI in its various phases. Data, I think, is at the cornerstone of AI. So we need to be looking at really from a comms perspective, very much with a clearer lens, because that's where issues may lie. And equally, that's where kind of reputations can be built from as well. I say that out of experience. But it's really good to kind of get your views on how the newsroom is changing, how businesses are adapting, and how the fact that there's still a lot of work to be done in kind of making sure that the kind of decision makers and teams widely kind of adopt AI and are better skilled up to kind of use these fantastic tools. So thank you very much. If anyone here still is here, then feel free to kind of follow us. I encourage you to follow Laura and HP. They'll put out some great content. LinkedIn, I assume, is going to be the best platform for this. Equally, if we're not connected here, please follow me on LinkedIn or Folgate Advisors. I publish a reputation management newsletter or Reputation Matters newsletter as well through my LinkedIn, so feel free to connect there. Apart from that, we'll be writing this up, putting the video out there. Thank you very much, and we'll connect again soon.
Thank you very much, Julio.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.